largest oil refinery is named Motiva and is actually owned by the Saudis. So the largest oil refinery in the United States is owned by the Saudis. So how much oil do we use to make plastic? This is a question a lot of people ask, and my answer is none. And I will try to explain that in the next few slides. So how much oil do we use to make plastic? None. Okay. So how does this all work? This is an oil refinery. This is a refining column from an oil refinery, and the barrel of oil comes in at the bottom and you heat it up. And the stuff in the box there, in the middle distance, is the gas oils and the kerosenes. That's all the valuable stuff. That's what they want. That's all the stuff in the middle. Okay. So the refining process, we actually start with a 42-gallon barrel of crude oil. You heat it up, you get liquids and gases, you siphon off the things you want, and oddly enough, you actually end up with 45 gallons of product. This is because you've taken something fairly viscous and thick, and you've actually created some products that are thinner and lighter, and so you actually get a bigger volume. So this is kind of like magic capitalism for those in the petroleum industry. So 75% of that barrel of oil is the good stuff that's really valuable to them, and that's the petrol, the diesel, and the jet fuel. And that's what you sell, and the rest of it is either much heavier and sinks to the bottom, or is much lighter and goes up to the top as gases. Here's a picture of a barrel of oil. Now, you can set up your refinery lots of different ways, and the refineries in the United States are set up to produce more petrol and less diesel, and the refineries in Europe are set up to produce more diesel and less petrol. So this is an image that basically is an American barrel of oil. This comes from the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, which is a part of the national United States government that was set up in the 70s when we had an oil crisis because of the Saudis, and we decided we wanted to be a lot more self-sufficient, and so they made this enormous agency that collects huge amounts of data from the petroleum industry and publishes it for free. And it's massive, and so on. And this basically helps the oil industry be more profitable because they get all this data and research for free. But anyway, so here we have it. We have, if you add up the gasoline, the jet fuel, and the diesel, you get 75%. And so that's really where the money is, and that's what they're really after. And then you get liquid petroleum gases. That's actually where the plastic comes in. Okay, those are additional gases which come off as liquids, which are basically ethylene and propylene that you make plastic from. There's also other distillates. There's butane and this, that, and the other thing. And then there's some really heavy stuff like asphalt and stuff that's down at the bottom. So they use a lot of confusing terms in the oil industry data. I'm not going to go into all of this, but they basically don't really want you to know much about the connection between the plastic and the oil. So they use lots of different words for the gases. They're actually all the same thing, but they use a lot of different words. So sometimes they call them liquid refinery gases, sometimes they call them hydrocarbon gas liquids, sometimes they call them naphthas, and sometimes they call them refinery gas. And they're basically all these gases, most of which is used to create plastic. But they really don't want you to really figure it out very well. So I had to sort of do a lot of work. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is you get free chemicals. Every time you refine every barrel of oil, you get free chemicals that represent 7 to 10% of a refined barrel of oil. The two most important are propylene and ethylene. You may also have heard of propane and ethane. And those are actually identical things, except propylene is a liquid and propane is a gas, and ethylene is a liquid and ethane is a gas. But they're the same, basically the same thing. So propylene and ethylene are the building blocks of plastic. All of the plastics are made from propylene and ethylene, and you can actually switch your process. If you've got more ethylene and less propylene, you can actually still make all the same plastics. And I'm not a chemist, and that's about all I know, but there it is. So in the United States, we refine more for the petrol, and in Europe, they refine more for the diesel. But you get the chemicals for free, regardless of which mix you do. So these are you've seen all these little symbols. They don't actually mean you can recycle any of this, but these are the plastics that we know of. So PETE, polyethylene, tetra, I'm not quite sure what. 2 is high-density polyethylene, so it's got that ethylene thing in it. The first one had the polyethylene. The 3 is PVC, which is polyvinyl chloride. LDPE, low-density polyethylene. Polypropylene is number 5. Number 6 is polystyrene. And 7 actually isn't anything in particular, it's just everything else. And occasionally you'll see on something that's marked, you'll actually see a number 7 and then a little bunch of letters actually identifying what it is. And one of those that's become popular and that I'm actually a fan of is PLA, so it'll say 7 PLA. And PLA is a plastic which is made entirely from corn and is actually 100% compostable. And it can go back to the soil and it will not hurt your vegetables. And it's not used very much because it looks the same as the other plastics and it's hard to get it separated and so on. But anyway, it's so 7 is just anything else, including ABS is what all the Legos are made of, for example. It's also number 7. All right. So you have this oil refinery and they want to monetize these free gases, and so they gather up the propylene, the ethylene, maybe the butane, whatever the gases are, and they literally pipe them next door in a pipe. And they make plastic. So here is a Google Maps photo of the Motiva oil refinery that I showed you, which is in bottom right-hand corner there, and it shows you that you can actually drive to the Flint Hills Resources chemical plant, and it's only 1.7 miles from front door to front door, but as you can really see, you can't actually tell where the petroleum refinery ends and the petrochemical plant begins. They're right connected, okay? And here is another one. This is ExxonMobil, also in the same neck of the woods, but you've got the refinery here and you got the chemical right there. They're literally just piping these chemicals across, and there seems to be no, nobody tells you if there's any cost associated with this. So does the petrochemical industry actually pay anything for these gases? I have no idea. I've not been able to find out. Maybe they just get them for free. So this is a little bit of a sidebar about fracked gas, which is an enormous problem in the United States at the moment. It turns out that all of the horrible fracking, which has enormous, terrible consequences in all sorts of things with polluting the water and any number of things, it also, for every cubic meter of methane, which is the gas that we use, that comes out of the ground, you get an enormous amount of ethane with it, huge amounts of ethane. And so the ethane is actually dangerous. You can't send it down the pipeline and into people's homes with the methane because it actually is much more combustible, and so it is very, very highly regulated. So in the United States, you're only allowed to have 5%. You're only allowed to have 5% ethane in your methane pipeline, and so all the rest of it is like, well, what the heck do we do with this junk? And so they are now, a lot of it's getting burnt off, but they are now in the process of building a 360-acre ethane-based plastic factory in southeast Pennsylvania. 360 acres. They're spending $1 billion because they're gonna, or maybe whatever. They're spending billions, and they're expecting to make hundreds of billions, and they're going to drown us all in even more plastic because they've got this free ethane. So just beware. Okay, so how do you make plastic? So you've shipped it next door, you add some more heat, you add some catalysts, you add some chemicals, and you end up with, you produce plastic resin. Well, plastic resin are these little pellets, and you can't tell one from another when they're in pellet form, but there'll be one kind of plastic. You'll set up your petrochemical plant to produce PET for soda bottles, or to produce polypropylene, or to produce whatever. Or you'll have different channels that are producing different ones. And here are the numbers I've just told you about. And your end result is what they call virgin resin, which are these little tiny pellets, which you see on the left here. So it's just this little stuff, and that's the plastic. And then they sell that to what's called a converter, which is a company that produces an item, an object, a product out of plastic. So the petrochemical companies make the pellets, the little stuff, and they sell it, and plastic is made. And this is an image of milk crates made out of probably made out of HDPE. So this is a possible product from your virgin resin. Okay, so why did I say none? Well, now you probably already know the answer. I said none because we make the gasoline, the diesel, and the jet fuel. We burn up all that fuel. We get all that money from that whole barrel of oil, and yet we still get these chemicals for free. So if we stop making plastic tomorrow, we won't save a single barrel of oil. They are absolutely, for every barrel of oil, there are more free chemicals. So every barrel refined means they want to monetize and get more plastic and sell it to us. More. Increase in oil refining means increase in plastic production. The companies want to know how can we sell more plastic and make more money. And so one of the things that they've done, and the reason there is so much more plastic in the world today than there was 20 or 30 years ago when I was growing up, is that they invent products all the time and then impose them on the market. And then, of course, tell the consumer that it's all their fault. So, for example, here are just two products that did not exist 20 years ago. The first one is pallet wrap. Every time a pallet of boxes goes anywhere in the world, it's wrapped in plastic nowadays. And 30 years ago, they were not wrapped in plastic. They were simply piles of things, sometimes with maybe a tarp on them. But every single one is now wrapped in pallet wrap. They've invented this product, and they sell it at a price that is so low and so convenient for industry that it gets bought all the time. It gets used once, and it gets tossed away. The price, they can set the price because they're basically getting the chemicals for free. So they invent something that they can sell as a cheap alternative. The cheap alternative is putting people out of work. You can zip your forklifts around faster. Yeah, anyway. Yeah. And this other one is boat shrink wrap. Now, I live in New England, there's a lot of coastline, there's a lot of people with pleasure boats. They used to store them in sheds in the winter, and now they shrink wrap these things. It's unbelievable. I mean, everywhere are shrink wrapped boats. Everywhere. And those weren't around 20 years ago. It's just like, what the heck? It's a great invented product. Yeah, let's sell a lot of this stuff. Okay. So the economics of this is really, really nasty and really depressing. The plastics industry is highly, highly profitable and is tightly tied to the oil and gas extraction. The oil and gas production is also highly profitable, and so since they're linked, it is going to be very, very, very difficult to slow this down. They're out to monetize to the hilt as soon as possible. Okay, so now the messaging. So here's just a couple of facts about some plastic. The good thing about plastic is that it actually is a really robust material, and if you stick to one kind, you can actually remelt it and make it over again into the same thing. So that's actually the principle behind recycling. The principle. Okay. That HDPE milk crate that I showed you a couple slides back can be melted down, if it breaks, into HDPE and remade into a milk crate. And this is absolutely fabulous, and this is what we should be doing all over the world all the time. But you need to have each object made from a single plastic to do this. Now, the bad news is if you mix them all up like that crisps bag from Walker's, you can never get the plastics apart and you will never recycle it. If you make a mixed product, which is a paper cup with a plastic liner, you also cannot recycle it. And the other really depressing part is because they've got this industry totally in control and they get their raw material for free, it is more expensive to collect and recycle plastic than it is to buy virgin pellets. And that is why we're really screwed. So, the industry has a recycle story. And their answer to plastic waste is recycling. But, and I'm speaking for America because that's what I know, recycling of plastic in America is almost always what I call downcycling or one-cycling. So, for example, the PET soda bottle is downcycled in America. It is made either into, that is recycled, it's made either into carpet pad, the pad that goes under the carpet, or into fleece. And then when those products are done, they go to the landfill. So it is a one more product and then finito, done. There's a lot more on this subject. Here's a couple of links. Coke and other big soft drink makers promote general recycling efforts, but they actively try and stop a deposit. They actively try to stop a deposit. So they'll help your city have more bins and educate the public and la 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 la, but they actually will not, they will fight tooth and nail against a deposit program. There's only about 12 to 15 states in the United States that have bottle deposit programs, and then the others don't, and they're not going to have them anytime soon. So these are some other things. Oh, there's something else the industry tries to talk about nowadays, and that's chemical recycling. There's physical recycling, which is what we try to do now. There's chemical recycling, which is supposedly they're going to actually use a lot of heat, which means a lot of energy, to then disassemble these plastics back into their original chemicals so that they then can be used by the chemical industry to make other things. But the amount of fossil fuel resources needed to do this is unbelievably high. It is absolutely not. It's absolutely not feasible. It's a bunch of baloney. And yet they get government funding for doing these little studies about how to do this. The other story that we're told all the time is the bad consumer story, and the plastics industry actively promotes the bad consumer story. This is that we are the problem. We are terrible consumers, and all of the problem around plastic pollution is because of us. Now, I admit that we need to be a little bit more careful, and we can each do a little bit, but the industry is very, very, very much to blame. We are told that the problem is the wasteful consumer and our throwaway convenient culture. This is a quote here from a UN report that recently came out about ocean pollution. Our current lifestyle entails increasing consumption of products intended for single use. Plastic manufacturing and service industries are responding to the market's demand. I reject that categorically. I don't buy it, I'm sorry. So UN has unfortunately adopted some of this messaging. There is a group in Norway, I think, called Grid Arendal, which wrote a report for the UN on ocean plastic pollution. And it's kind of, yeah, I mean, the messaging is definitely, it's not pro-industry, but it's definitely not anti-industry. It basically says, it spreads the blame absolutely equally among industry, government, and society. And I do not spread the blame evenly. But this report does. It's a huge, big thing. You can see it. Here's the link. And one section title that I absolutely am appalled at is "We all contribute to this problem, yes, all." And I think that it's particularly offensive when you think of the Global South, who are the people who get trashed and trashed and trashed, and who really are not contributing very much to this problem and are incredibly impacted by it. So I think that the messaging is, yeah. And I'm sorry that the UN could have gotten sort of co-opted by it and la 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 la, and they got the report for free probably, and whatever. You know, I'm just saying I don't. This is an image, you can't really see it, but this is an image from that Grid Arendal report, and basically it shows you that here's all the plastic at the top being made, it's all getting funneled through society, and then it's all going out into the environment. So the implication here is that it's society, it's us, which is actually causing all of this pollution. So again, it's an interesting image, but I don't think it's really on the money. I mean, it's on the money, yeah, for the money people, but I don't think it really tells the appropriate story. So here is a very recent, so because this ocean pollution thing has gotten so big recently, the plastics industry has had to respond. And so just this year, a few months ago, in 2019, the plastics industry created a new nonprofit called the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. It was completely created by Dow Chemical and LyondellBasell, which is one of the other largest petrochemical companies in the world. And they created this nonprofit to look good. They have members. The members are all the the other petrochemical companies, and then people like Coca-Cola and so on. And those members have all pledged $1.5 billion over 5 years. Well, what are they emphasizing as their way to clean up the ocean? What is their solution? Their solution is infrastructure. Okay, we need to have more recycling places. Innovation. We need to come up with better ways, like our chemical recycling that doesn't work. We need to educate the public so they do a better job, and then we all need to clean things up. You notice that there is not a single mention of producing less. Not a single mention. This is their pretty website. The real problem is the price of the new plastic is way too low. It does not reflect the cost of disposal, and they keep refining oil, so they want to keep selling it. So plastic, as I said, is a durable product. It's a great material. You can actually do stuff with it. Each type of plastic has different properties. Number 5 is the stuff that yogurt comes in. The product goes in warm. It's good with warm and cold. It's a wonderful product. 2 is what gas cans, petrol cans are made of, because it's impervious to chemicals and solvents. 1 is what we all use for soda bottles, because it actually traps those little bubbles, and the soda doesn't go flat. They float in different liquids or sink, and so you can sort them that way. They have different melt temperatures. The 3 that are the easiest to work with are the LDPE, the HDPE, and the PP, that has actually very, very low melt temperatures, easy to work with in a toaster oven at your own home. There's a wonderful website called preciousplastic.com that was started by some people in Holland, and they promote this reuse of plastic. The key of it all is sorting. You can use this float sorting method because all the plastics look alike in pellets, but they each have a different specific gravity, a different weight. What you do is you try to float things you dump all your plastic into water. Some will float and some will sink. The PET, those soda bottles, will sink unless they have their caps on. The PET plastic that soda bottles are made of sinks. It does not float. So if you see that floating garbage in the ocean, it's mostly not that PET. That's already down in the bottom of our oceans. Just so you know, PVC and PBS and PS also sink. You don't want to work with them because they let off toxic fumes when you warm them up. So polyvinyl chloride lets off chlorine gas, and polystyrene lets off styrene gas. So HDP, LDP, and PP all float in water. How do you separate them? You can float them in oil. Any vegetable oil will do, and the PP will float and the other 2 will sink. You can then take isopropyl alcohol at half strength of what you buy at the chemist's, and 1 will sink and 1 will float. So you manage to separate out your 3 kinds. The Dutch people have free plans on their website about how to make these machines, a shredder, an extruder, and an injection molder. Maybe we can get some money for more villages to get these. There is, however, a drawback that they all run on electricity. You need power to run these machines. The electricity is not always available in poor countries, and it can also be very expensive. There's a small-scale alternative, which I understand will no way solve our problems, but I think it's a useful tip for people to learn. You can take small pieces, you can shred them up by hand, you can heat them in a toaster oven, and you can mold them into something. This is me. Here I am, on my covered porch with my toaster oven. Here are some straws, and there are some melted straws. And this is, this is an easy temperature. This is nothing. This is 300 degrees Fahrenheit. This is nothing. Fishing gear happens to be is all plastic. Some of it's nylon, which is actually a hard plastic to work with, but the rest is mostly number 4, and so there should be good opportunities for poor countries to pick up their number 4 plastic and reshape it, maybe make new fishing gear out of it. This is just a piece I want to tell you about. The industry has always told us that sun-degraded plastic is completely useless and must be gotten rid of because you just have to burn it or put it in the landfill. However, these people at Precious Plastic who have done beach cleanups went and did a little experiment, which is at that website. And there were these jerry cans that were all, this was in the Maldives, there were hundreds of these cans, so this guy, Paul Dufour, took a really yucky one that was obviously sun-degraded and a good one. He melted each one down separately, he extruded a bar of plastic from each one, and then he tested them in a drill press, in a hydraulic press, and what was so interesting is that the degraded one was almost as strong as, so after being melted down, so it would be great to get somebody from a university to redo this in a controlled environment and to actually publish it in a peer review. I've actually tried emailing a couple of people at MIT, and I've gotten no response, and also at Woods Hole, I've gotten no response at all, but I mean, I'm a nobody, so they don't respond. It would be great to see some workshops in third world countries. That's something I'm trying to do in Haiti with Stephanie. It certainly won't solve the problem, but it will give people some agency. So how does this connect to ecofeminism? Well, providing communities with knowledge and tools. You can facilitate dispersed actions, so bottom up. You can strengthen the bond between the communities and their own environment. And by creating objects of value, you can give all people greater agency and can help empower the disadvantaged, women, children, elders. These are some sources where I got a lot of my data from. These are data sources. BP has a big bunch of data as well. They put out every year. These are some of these consultants who, Plastics Europe is a marketing group for the plastic industry in Europe. these are some environmental nonprofits that had some very interesting reports about plastic and health and all sorts of things. And this is the best document I found on the float sorting, and it actually was made by some teacher in North Carolina for her 6th or 7th grade science class. Yeah, so it's super cool, but it's on the internet, and I think it's really easy to use, and it's the best thing. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. So, any questions from the floor?
Really opened my eyes in a very depressing way.
Thank you.
Sorry. I want to ask whether, given all the publicity recently about the horrors of plastic, are the petrochemical companies that we've been talking about not shaped in any way to make changes other than the cosmetic ones you talked about?
No, they have no shame. They are worried. They're definitely worried, and that's why they made that fancy new nonprofit just 6 months ago. They are worried, and we are doing a good job. So let's step it up and keep them worried. But they have no shame, and I don't understand because they all have grandchildren, but they simply don't care. It's all about monetizing over the next 3 months as much as possible. I have not seen any evidence of shame.
And they cannot be shamed.
I don't know. We can keep trying, but we keep the pressure up because they're getting worried about. They're actually worried about not being able to sell their products as much. Good one. Yeah, let's keep up the pressure. Thank you.
Hello, that was a brilliant speech. I'm just curious as to when they're separating out the oil for cars and planes and
Right.
so on, the gases that are then used for the plastic, I can't see that there's a likelihood that they'll actually stop producing those gases.
Correct.
Because they want the petrols.
Correct.
So is there, there's no, it seems like a really difficult thing to try and find a solution to.
Right, so we need to get them to be producing less petrol and
Yes.
refining fewer barrels of oil, and
Yeah.
then by
plastics.
we will get fewer chemicals for the plastics. But it's an incredibly difficult problem. Yes.
How to break that cycle. Yeah.
Yes, very difficult. Yes, you're right on. You got the most important message. Yes.
Thank you for that. I was just going to mention that this mindsets of individuals are changing.
The what?
The mindsets of shoppers, especially millennials,
Yes.
we don't really like to buy plastic anymore. And I think people are trying to find different methods of reducing their sort of carbon footprint. So, by any sort of means of economics of supply and demand, do you think these businesses will eventually have no choice but to switch the way they operate? Meaning that they'll invest more into renewables. I know renewables isn't as green, but it's sort of less polluting.
Yeah, so really the best solution is what you call extended producer responsibility, EPR, which has actually been adopted quite well in the EU. There's a bunch of countries that have various things where you, for example, you go to a grocery store in Germany and you can simply unpack your stuff and you can leave all the cardboard and the plastic on the counter, and they have to do something with it. This is something that the American companies are fighting hugely against, and there's virtually no extended producer responsibility. But every computer case is made out of plastic, and that's fine. Your computer lasts for a long time, and then Hewlett-Packard should take back that computer, and then they should remelt that plastic for that case and make it into another computer case. So the extended producer responsibility is absolutely the key. It is absolutely the key. We need it everywhere and fast. And I have zero hope for the U.S., so let's not go there. But that's really what, yeah. Yes?
Hi. Thank you very much for that information. I'm going to use a lot of it and sound very, very clever. My question, I suppose, is two-part. And actually having associates who have been working on, I don't understand all of it, but on breaking down polymer chains to try and find carbon investment and water and such, I'm now going to be grilling them on those things. You were talking about the free the free energy, the free gas, the free, you said gasoline, that was being taken from the land by fracking and other means. So my question is, because that has been happening all over the world through war and conquest and slave traded economic structures and unfair trade routes. And when it comes to, you know, this sort of false supremacist version of the sustainable argument, which is what we've talked about, you know, cobalt mining will not only not be enough, but it's also extremely poisonous and harmful in itself. So I'm wondering to what extent, because we know that the pipeline wars in and themselves are not just about getting the oil, but depriving that country of its own resource. I just wonder if you know the statistics around what is available to the US and how much it actually needs to take from others, just when it comes to oil.
So the U.S. First of all, I don't know what they get from third world countries, but the U.S. is an interesting thing. The U.S. actually refines more oil than they produce. So, for example, the oil from Venezuela, which is incredibly thick and gunky, goes to the U.S. to a particular set of refineries that were set up to refine that thick, gunky oil. And then some of it is left in the U.S. as payment for the refinery, and then some of it goes back to Venezuela. For example, the horrible Alberta tar sands from Canada is all refined in the United States, and they actually put some of these lighter naphtha things into their yucky, horrible tar sands to actually make it thin enough to go through a goddamn pipeline and to get it to the oil refinery in the U.S. And then a lot of that goes back and so on. So, but the U.S. own reserves, they have gobs. I mean, they have gobs of reserves. And the Saudis have gobs of reserves, and they're not running out anytime soon. So Europe doesn't have as many reserves and gets some from the Saudis and may run out sooner. But that may be a good thing because that makes Europe more interested actually about getting other getting renewables going. But we're not running out of petroleum product anytime soon. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. And the thing I was actually thinking towards the beginning was, and you actually ended up talking about it, to what extent can recycling of plastics be done outside of industry by, you mentioned villages or households or communities? Because it seems to me if plastic is a good, robust material, why can't we use it if we're recycling? And obviously there are cultures of recycling, particularly in the global south.
Absolutely.
So if people can be responsible for it themselves.
Absolutely.
To what extent do you think that's realistic?
So I think it's realistic on a very small scale. It's obviously time consuming. You're going to go to your beach and you're going to pick up a bunch of this junk, and then you're going to have to sort it. You're going to have to wash it, and you're going to have to sort it. And then you're going to get it into one type. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to work on polypropylene today, number 5. And then you're going to melt it down, and then you can reform it into, into a plate, or the handle of a garden trowel, or whatever, or something that you can use, or something that you can sell to your neighbor. So it's definitely doable. It will obviously not at all solve the crisis, but it is a small thing that people who have lots of time and are unemployed can actually do for themselves. It's absolutely not going to solve the problem. There's somebody.
Hi, thank you. I was actually wondering what the health implications are of burning plastic.
I'm very glad you mentioned that. So, you absolutely do not want to burn plastic. Do not burn plastic. There's horrible garbage dumps all over the world of e-waste, mostly in Ghana, and I think Ghana has the biggest one. Absolutely horrible things. We ship all of our nasty computers and this and that is down there, and then these people who have absolutely nothing, they set fires. So for example, in a computer you're going to have a bunch of copper wires and they're all coated in plastic, and I hate to tell you, but the plastic they're coated in, because it's so cheap, is PVC, which is unbelievably toxic. We ought to ban PVC coating of electrical wire worldwide. No, seriously, because you could use another less toxic plastic, but they use PVC. It's like, what the heck? So these people then burn, they set fires in these e-waste places to retrieve the copper, and they kill themselves. I mean, it is absolutely incredibly toxic. So never burn plastic. I mean, I don't know whether it's Sweden or Norway, but one of the Nordic countries actually does incinerate a lot of their garbage, and they're very careful about the scrubbers that they put on their incinerators, and so they're very, very careful about not polluting their air. But the really interesting thing that someone who's interested in zero waste once said to me is they said, the better your scrubbers on an incinerator, the more toxic the gunk is at the bottom of the incinerator that you're left with. And there was once, I think it was Sweden who does this, I think there was a story last year about Sweden dumping their toxic incinerator ash on an uninhabited Norwegian island, and they got caught. So no, you don't want to burn this stuff. I mean, absolutely. And don't let industry tell you that they're gonna collect the empty fishing nets, the ghost nets from the ocean, and they're gonna take them into some port in Southeast Asia, and then they're just gonna burn them. Don't let them. Don't burn it.
This is very interesting, so thank you. Another debate in my country is, of course, the microplastic, because one thing is the plastic that you can recycle. Then we know that our fleece jackets, every time we wash them, there are a lot of plastic that are going down, and it's found again in our bodies. We measure that now, that we actually have a lot of plastic in everywhere, and it's accumulating in the system. So of course, if we're going to do something on every level, even the ones of us, these are huge systems, what can we do? We can stop buying the fleece jackets.
Yeah. Somebody at the top here.
Hi, thanks. I am from Somalia. My name is Abdul. The interesting question I have here is two questions. But let me give you a little bit of story about Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia. I've been away for many years, but when I returned 2 years ago, I was so shocked to see the amount of plastic circulating in the environment, especially in the cities, and even the plastics taken away by the wind, and you will see hanging on the trees everywhere. Even though the country is in conflict and people are killing each other, there's bombs everywhere, my concerns were the amount of plastics in circulation. I started to work with the governor of the city, and we tried to find a method of trying to encourage people to collect their plastics and put them in bins around regions or districts in the city. To my shock, that did not even work, because people are used to these plastics. They are cheaper. They don't want to make the effort of collecting it. And the question I have is, even though you mentioned in your presentation that consumers have less blame here, less blame the industry. I think as a consumers we have a part of the blame, because a huge amount from what I've seen in Africa, a poor nation who you think they will listen and they will all think of the environment. But the question is, how can we as a society, or those who are in government, or those who are in education, how can we promote society or consumers to change their behavior and their attitude? That's my question one. So if we remove the blame from the consumers, then this never-ending problem will continue. So we try to do studies in the college and the schools. We are trying to work on that now. I'm working with the government. But the other question I have is that, how can we, especially Europe is trying very hard to, and Asia is trying hard to reduce the plastics, but in Africa it seems there's no emphasis on reducing the plastics. So how can we make the African government to have a kind of an agreed level of the amount of use of plastics in our countries, and to have the agreement and to control it? It seems that the consumers are getting a lot of plastics and there's no control. And they are selling it cheap, as you said. Sometimes you get it for free. Buy one and get 10 free. So those two questions: how can we change the African mentality and also the consumers?
Thank you for your question. So I think on the way we use and relate to plastics, I really think that children are an excellent place. I mean, I think if you can get science teachers all over the world to do this little stuff with, go collect, go bring me, each child brings in 10 pieces of plastic, and then we'll do the little sort, and we'll do this, and we'll melt them down, and I think it's great. I mean, you can show kids, and then the kids will then bring it home, and I think that's really an excellent way. I'm not trying to remove blame from consumers. I'm really trying to spread the blame in an appropriate way. Obviously, consumers have a responsibility. But again, on the global south, I went to Haiti with Stephanie, and there was plastic just everywhere. It's just unbelievable. I mean, Haiti has no garbage collection system. There's piles of garbage. The goats come and eat the organics, and they're left with the plastic. It's everywhere. I took some photos. It's just appalling. But they also have this horrible, there's an incredible amount of products that are sold in sachets. So sachets are little tiny pieces of plastic like this, and if you don't have the money for a bottle of ketchup, or if you don't have the money for a bottle of shampoo, or a bottle of household cleaner, or whatever the heck it is, they'll sell it to you in sachets. And this, again, has happened in the last 20 years, and is really awful, and it's taking advantage of poor people. Yeah, but I have no idea how to get the governments to move. I guess I would start with the local government and try to get them to do a few things and maybe push it up, but I honestly don't know how to solve that. Oh, time to go on here.
Sorry that I know that there's more hands are up, but if you can again speak to Susan during the lunch.
Yeah, come talk to me at lunch. I'd be happy to take your questions. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.